just experienced its warmest and third driest winter on record. The Secretary of Agriculture declared 53 out of 58 California counties natural disaster areas. One of the effects of the drought is grass drying up, leaving cows little to munch on. So, as our team in California discovered, many farmers are having to sell cows they can't afford to keep and leave many acres of cropland idle. This report from Central Valley.
Hundreds of cows are walking uphill towards a mountain. It will take them 4 days to get there.
We're driving our cows up the mountain to summer pastures where there's more green grass.
Californian cattlemen are forcing this migration. Why? There's been no rain, and therefore no grass for their cattle to feed on. It's the result of California's devastating drought.
This is the worst I have ever seen. 2013, I've been at it my whole life. I'm 55 years old. The cows are thin, probably 100 to 200 pounds weight, less than what they normally would be at this time.
To protect their cows' health and avoid going bankrupt, many ranchers have no choice but to sell their cattle. Livestock auctions like this one are very well attended this year, which is helping keep this old-fashioned cowboy tradition alive. Here, the drought makes for good business. Beth, the organizer of this auction, says today there are more than 1,000 heads of cattle for sale.
These cattle are already sold, and then what's left over there, everything will be sold today. We're probably selling 5 to 6 times more cattle per week than we normally would this time of year.
There are buyers from Oregon, Colorado, and Texas here. They've come to buy beef-range cattle from disillusioned ranchers such as Kim Oviatt. He has sold 300 cows, the majority of his herd.
Our worst drought prior to this was 35 years ago, and not as bad as this. We've never had to take these dramatic measures of selling like this before. I've been working on this cow herd for over 40 years of genetics, and having to sell them is very difficult.
Kim takes us to his ranch to show us the impact of the drought.
Look at that. I ought to have mud on my boots, not dust.
With no grass, Kim had to buy hay to feed his cows. The drought makes it a rare and expensive commodity.
We've been buying hay, well, all season long, effectively. And normally, of course, we're not buying any hay at this time of year. As a result, everybody's trying to buy hay. Hay is a precious commodity and very expensive.
If the drought continues, Kim will have to sell all of his cows and change jobs. And the situation is getting worse. Climatologists say the coming summer will be historically dry.
This should be seen in the context of a very long-term drought that we're experiencing here in the Southwest. That is much more consistent with what we expect from climate warming due to increased greenhouse gases. And this has probably been about the worst one we've had in maybe 500 years or so.
The lack of water also affects Californian farmers. Sergio had to destroy part of his orchard. Sergio has lost more than 1,000 acres of almond trees, 30% of his production. He's taking a hit of about $20 million.
And you can see all the trees, they're dying. And we had to pull it out.
It's not profitable to buy water either. It now costs 6 times its regular price. Sergio doesn't hide his frustration. He's still waiting for financial aid promised by President Barack Obama during his recent visit to the region.
The president came up, about a month ago here, and he's supposed to do something about it, but so far we don't see anything. So, and it's really serious. I mean, everybody, like I say, I've been labeled a lot of people.
California is the top agricultural producer in the U.S. That means the next victims of this drought will be consumers nationwide. Prices for beef, fruits, and vegetables could increase as much as 20% this summer.
For more on the drought in California, I'm now joined from Washington, D.C. by Emily Adams. She's a staff researcher at the Earth Policy Institute. Hello, and thank you very much indeed for being with us. Now, first of all, is climate change to blame for the drought in California?
Well, we cannot say that any one particular weather event is caused by climate change, but we do know that this drought is happening in a warmer climate. Overall, the globe is warming, and in California especially, it is warming. We've seen the warmest winter on record in California, so that is definitely playing a role in this drought, making it more intense and perhaps making it last longer as well.
Just how worrying is the situation there?
Well, as we learned from your segment, it is a very important fruit and vegetable basket for the United States. So a large portion of our fruits and vegetables come from there. And so when they are having a drought, that's going to impact the entire country. And we'll see that in our food prices at the grocery store in a few months.
Now, the President, Barack Obama, as we heard in our report, visited Northern California recently, and he announced a $183 million aid package. Is that the solution, do you think, or what should the governments in other countries experiencing similar problems be doing about situations like this?
Well, so that $183 million, that might help today, but what we really need is large investments in moving away from our fossil fuel-based economy and moving towards a clean energy economy, away from those carbon emissions. From this drought, we can see that inaction on climate change can have huge costs. And so we really need to be investing today in moving towards that clean energy economy to avoid even greater costs down the future from increased warming.
And do you think it's up to each country to decide what's best for them, or should the solution be found internationally through deals?
Well, we've seen through the Kyoto Protocol process with the UN that it's very difficult to get so many nations to agree. So if one nation, such as the United States or China, if these countries can lead on action on climate change, perhaps others will follow. Or we might also get more traction with bilateral or multilateral agreements. But the point is not to wait for everyone to get on board. The point is to start right now, whether that's at the state level. We've seen, in fact, California make a lot of strides in action on climate change with their cap and trade program, everything from the state, local, federal, and if possible at the international level as well. Climate change is going to impact everyone, and everyone needs to be working to prevent further temperature increases.
Now, of course, California isn't the only state affected. The US isn't the only country experiencing extreme weather. We saw extreme temperatures in Australia not that long ago. Are the effects of climate change getting worse, do you think, around the world?
Well, it's hard to say, like I said, with any one particular weather event, but we can expect more and more of these types of, whether it's droughts in California or the extreme heat that we saw in Australia, whether it's flooding in other parts of the world. We know that lots of change is coming and that it will only get worse if we allow the temperatures to continue to increase because of further carbon emissions.
Now, surely one argument that would convince governments perhaps to do more is the cost, because as we saw in the report, droughts have an effect on food prices. You touched on this before, and not just in California.
Right. We saw the United States had a significant drought in 2012 in a big part of its grain growing region. About 80% of farms were affected by that drought, and the United States is a big supplier of grain around the world. So we saw world grain prices going up, which also can lead to instability in countries that really depend on perhaps food subsidies. So grain and food prices are an integral part of where climate change really comes to a head.
Now, there are mixed views on the evolution of global warming, whether it's going to get better or not. How do you think the planet will look in, let's say, 50 years' time?
How the planet looks 50 years from now really depends on what we as a civilization are doing today and tomorrow. So if we can have that fast action on climate change, and at the Earth Policy Institute, we recommend cutting carbon emissions by 80% from our current amounts as fast as possible in order to avoid the most drastic consequences of climate change. However, if we continue on our current path of burning more and more greenhouse gases and more fossil fuels, then we can be expecting up to 6 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, which is a terrible scenario that I don't think anyone can really comprehend or wants to see happen. So that means action today and tomorrow.
Emily Adams from the Earth Policy Institute, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's it for Focus. We're going to go to a short break. When we come back, I'll have the headlines for you. We'll be going live to Australia as that search has had to be suspended for the missing plane. And in culture, Japanese architect Shigeru Ban, who's made temporary housing for victims of natural disasters and refugees, wins his field's highest honour. We'll have that and plenty more coming right up. Stay tuned.